Since its launch, the Michelin CrossClimate 2 has been the all-season / all-weather tyre of choice, winning more tests than any other tyre in its category, including my own for the past 3 years in a row. But since my test last year, which it won, there's been not one, not two, but 3 new tyres, all aiming to knock the Michelin off its top spot. To find out whether any of these new tyres from Bridgestone, Continental, Pirelli can take it to the French tyre, of course, I'm testing it, that's what I do. As usual, I'll be doing the dry wet, snow, noise comfort, rolling resistance, and for this year wear to give you a really complete overview of these new tyres and to see whether any of them can actually show the Michelin who's boss. Can any of these new tyres upset the king of all weathers? Let's go and find out. As I say every year, the wet performance of an all-season tyre is most likely the most important performance of an all-season tyre, as that's where it will spend most of its life and will make most of the difference. And the good news, although this test is kind of, I'm testing the best of the best and the best of the newest and the newest of the best, the good news is most of the tyres are good. Now, I did chuck in a budget tyre. This year, it's a Fronway. Never heard of Fronway, and nor has anyone else I've ever spoken to. But it's available on the market. It's rated C in wet grip, but oh my gosh, it's exceptionally bad. I can't really tell you much more about why it's so bad because I spent the entire lap concentrating so hard just to stay on the track. That's all I could think about. So, as always, I don't know how many times I've said it this year, or technically that was last year. I don't know how many times I've said it last year. You get what you pay for in tyres, especially in the wet. As I've already said, the rest of the tyres were actually pretty good. Yokohama and Michelin were the slowest of the bunch, both of these having just a slightly limited front axle, which meant you're kind of sliding at the front. This is a safe quality for a tyre because it means you're going to see what you're going to hit as opposed to spinning on the road, which is easier to control, but it does hurt lap times a little bit. A small amount ahead was the Bridgestone. Now, not only does this tyre look like the Michelin, but it also behaves like the Michelin. It felt very safe, very understeery, and if it just had a little bit more bite on the front axle, I think it would have done very well around the lap, but it did feel monstrous on the brakes. We're going to talk about wet braking in a second. The Dunlop was next. Now, this was the only tyre that's got an asymmetric tread pattern, and it's the only tyre with the word sport in its name. So did it feel like the sporty of the group because it doesn't have that very all-season / winter style directional tread pattern? Well, in short, no. In the wet, at least, it didn't feel any more sporty than the rest. It just had a bit of a soft, it felt like it steered quickly, but it just felt a little bit soft around the transition phase, but good grip, good time. I enjoyed driving it. It definitely wasn't the worst of the group. That award goes to the Fronway. The final two tyres essentially tied for fastest lap, and that was the new Pirelli and the new Continental, two of the newest tyres on test, along with the Bridgestone. Now, the Pirelli did feel like the sports tyre of the group. Its steering was lovely and crisp, and it was direct, and it loaded up beautifully, but it did lack perhaps a tiniest bit of detail at the very limit, which the Continental had. The Continental was excellent. It was just a really, really well-rounded tyre. It was predictable, you knew what was going on, and I really enjoyed driving the new Continental. So well done, Continental and Pirelli. You've made excellent tyres in wet handling. What about the deeper water of aquaplaning? Well, none of the tyres had any issues with aquaplaning around the wet handling lap, so we of course ran deep water aquaplaning tests with 8 millimeters of water instead of 1 millimeter on wet handling. And the Pirelli led the way, which is a pretty impressive blend of qualities, doing well in both aquaplaning and wet handling. You don't often see that, so again, good job Pirelli. What about the all-important wet braking? This is probably the most important wet quality for an all-season tyre. I mean, not probably, it is, because braking is really what saves you from accidents. The Bridgestone absolutely crushed this test with nearly 1 meter to the second place Continental, which had over 1 meter to the third place Pirelli. That's amazing. The Fronway obviously was hot trash, but let's think about it this. We did some calculations on residual speed. We brake from 80 kilometers an hour to 0, and where the Bridgestone had you stopped, the Fronway was still doing 45.1 kilometers an hour. So that's less than half of your speed scrubbed off. That's a big crash. Think about that next time you think about fitting cheap tyres. As these are 16-inch all-season tyres, the dry handling of the tyres probably isn't your top priority to learn about. So what I've done is obviously I've put more weighting on braking as in the wet, but also I've spent a lot of time doing lane changes and steering reactions and aggressive lane changes to see how the tyres react at the limit, and should you find yourself in an emergency situation. how good they're going to treat you. Now, the slowest around the lap was actually, shock horror, the fun way. On the way to the handling lap, we're doing the lane changes and things like that. I was like, actually, this tyre has a little bit of promise, because it felt like it loaded up quite nicely during lane changes. It was quite stable, but as soon as you got to the lap and actually started pushing on, you had what I would only describe as comedy understeer, and it sounded like a screaming banshee, because all it did was go blah, and then give you no grip. You were just understeering a million miles on. So that's that. As in the wet though, the rest of the tyres were pretty good. The Yokohama and Michelin were the next two, and like in the wet, they exhibited just a bit too much understeer to get you quickly around the lap. But in terms of lane change and steering change and things like that, I thought they were very lovely. The Michelin was one of the nicest steering tyres, as it always is. Like, nice and safe is the Michelin product, if that could be their byline. The Bridgestone was next. That was just a little bit vague around centre, which I didn't like, but once it was loaded up and you were turning, it reacted very quickly, which I did like. So overall, I'm not entirely sure where I sit mentally on that blend of abilities, but I think overall it was very good, because round again during lane changes, super safe, super lovely. The Continental and Dunlop matched overall on lap time, with the asymmetric Dunlop actually feeling pretty sporty. Like in the wet, it was quick initially to turn, but then in the dry, as the lows were higher than the wet, you did notice it kind of sit on the sidewall a little bit. So I'm not sure whether this is an overall sporty feeling thing or not, but both of them were quite nice to drive, and I really enjoyed them. But the quickest and my favourite during all the subjectiveness was the Pirelli. It felt the most like a summer tyre. It dug in the most. You could lift off mid-corner, and instead of the understeering continue, it would tuck a little bit, and it was just an outright nice tyre to drive. This Pirelli is shaping up very, very nice. Good job, Pirelli, again in the dry. So what about dry braking? Well, shock horror, an all-season tyre test, and the Michelin CrossClimate 2 wasn't at the front of dry braking. In fact, it wasn't even second place. The Pirelli was a monster in dry braking, with over a metre to second place, which was the Bridgestone, which was nearly a metre ahead of the Michelin. So 3 incredible tyres. I mean, to beat the Michelin in dry braking, things are moving on. Maybe it's time for CrossClimate 3. We'll see, I guess. I've heard no news on it, but I'm sure it's in the works, because it will always be in the works. Again, the residual speed calculator this time we're breaking down from 100 miles an hour. The worst was hitting the whatever object you just about avoided on the best at about 40 kilometers an hour. So something to think about. Braking is super important. Snow handling. And once again, the good news is that all the tyres are pretty good, apart from maybe the Dunlop. I can really tell now why a lot of these companies are going to a directional tread pattern, because the asymmetric pattern of the Dunlop, it's the only one of the group, it just struggled in the snow. It was down on grip, and of all the tyres, and this Golf is normally quite an understeery car, it gave the Golf a bit of a loose rear end. So it was my most fun, because I enjoy tipping in and then getting oversteer and having a play around, but obviously not ideal for the road. Next up was the new Bridgestone. Now, this was a lot more planted at the rear, so it was a safe, balanced sort of road, but it was just down on grip in pretty much all directions. It also felt very comfortable on the snow, which is a weird thing to know. I don't know why. And the steering was a lot lighter than its groups, but that's good for the comfort testing, I guess. Now, it is very, very difficult to make a tyre both very good in the wet and very good in snow. And as we've already seen, the Bridgestone had such a big advantage in wet braking. This is probably why its snow performance is a little bit down, but these are all season tyres. They don't have to be amazing in snow, and this is the way Bridgestone have chosen to do it. And you know what? I'm completely fine with that. After the Bridgestone was a Yokohama with a pretty good step up in grip. Now, this tyre was just very undramatic. Like, I didn't feel like I was going that fast around the lap, but when the computer read out my lap time, I was like, oh, actually that's quicker than I expected. So good job on the Yokohama, very good grip in the snow, but again, a bit like the Bridgestone, but the other way around. We've seen it wasn't the best in the dry or wet. Fourth and third overall were all but tied with the Continental and the Fronway, the budget tyre, matching the Continental. How? Well, although the times were pretty much identical, the Continental was the easier to get around the lap. The Fronway had excellent grip, but it was all a little bit unpredictable, which I didn't particularly enjoy. However, this just goes to show a premium tyre can do everything well, because we've already seen the Continental can work in the dry and wet and the snow. The front way, well, it was a disaster in the dry and wet. So this is the difference between buying a tyre that's got good engineering in it, that does everything well, and a budget tyre that's a hero in one category, but a disaster in the other one. So like, keep that in mind. If you want to use this all-season tyre only in the snow, it's a good choice, but why would you use an all-season tyre only in the snow? That's the stupidest thing I might have ever said. In second place was the new Pirelli. Now, this was the most fun tyre to drive. It was really good round the lap. It felt happiest when it was turning, but it also felt good out the corners, and as you were turning on the brakes in, it was just a very stable, grippy, predictable product, and I super enjoyed driving it. However, there was one more tyre in this test, and once again, it is the Michelin CrossClimate 2 is the best in the snow. As you know, I always test blind where I can, and I was testing blind this time, and about halfway around lap 1 for set 4, I was like, oh, this feels special. Is this the Michelin? And it turned out set 4 was the Michelin. It just does everything well in the snow. It feels like a winter tyre. It's good out the corners, it's good in the corners, its balance is lovely and stable and understeery, so it's predictable, you just know what's going on, and you just kind of feel like the king of snow. You feel like you can do anything on the Michelin. So the old boy, the Michelin CrossClimate 2, is once again the best in the snow. How does the subjective handling, my lap times, line up with the objective test? Well, actually pretty well. The Continental and the Yokohama were best in snow traction. The Michelin and the Yokohama were best in snow braking, and of course the Michelin was the best in snow circle. If you want full details, they will be linked on the website, which is linked in the description, so go check that out, but let's move on now. In a rare change of pace, I actually had the time to test ice. The Pirelli was the best in ice traction, with the Continental very close behind, and the budget front way again doing well. At this point, I'm assuming the front way is simply a winter compound molded into an all-season pattern, which is something budget tyre manufacturers often do. They just have one compound that does a lot of things. Ice braking had the Yokohama topping the list, with the Continental again extremely close and the Michelin third. That means on average, the Continental was the best on ice, though none of these tyres have been designed with ice in mind. It's a shame I didn't have a winter tyre in this test, but do subscribe for a test later in the year which has ice and winter tyres and all-season tyres and even a summer tyre. So that'll be out September, October time. The wear results for this test once again come from a real-world convoy test, which is the gold standard in wear testing and provides more accurate results compared to machine testing. Sadly, it's also very expensive to do, so the budget tyre wasn't included. The results had the new Continental as the best of the group, projected to cover nearly 50,000 kilometers before reaching 1.6 millimeters. When you consider how good the grip of the tyre has been, that is very impressive. The surprise result was the new Bridgestone in second place. In recent years, Bridgestone have nearly always underperformed in wear tests, but this new tyre did incredibly well, and hopefully it's a trend that will continue. If you're from North America, you might be confused at the Michelin only finishing third, as your version of the tyre has a 60,000 mile treadwear warranty. Don't fret, this is the EU version that has much lower rolling resistance, but also has a lower starting tread depth. One cool fact, it actually had the lowest wearing compound of the group, but as it also starts with the least amount of tread to wear, this is why it could only finish mid-pack. When you compare wear against purchase price, you get a value metric, which is price per 1,000 kilometers, which the Continental also led, with the Yokohama sliding into second place thanks to a good wear and a low purchase price. The real losers here were the Michelin thanks to its very high purchase price, and the Pirelli as it really underperformed in the wear test. Michelin had the lowest rolling resistance, closely followed by the Dunlop, and the Yokohama lost some of its value points it just had, as it had the highest rolling resistance, over 30% more than the French tyre. Finally, I didn't get a chance to properly dig into comfort, but these are a 16-inch tyre and they were all pretty smooth. The external noise test was all very close, and my gut says the Bridgestone, Dunlop or Michelin would be the most comfortable in general. Finally, the results. As these are an all-season tyre, I've stuck with my mild climate score weighting, as I believe dry and wet is more important than snow for this category of tyre. But you can always go to the Tyre Reviews website, linked in the description below, and change the score weighting for your own preference and make your own results. That's the beauty of this data being all public and fully shared. The front way are the front way. The cheapest tyre on test was awesome in snow for the price point, but as these are all-season tyres and it was pure trash in the wet, just don't consider it. Honestly, it's one of the worst tyres I've had in the wet for a while. After the front way, all the tyres do get much better. The Yokohama Blue Earth 4S AW21 was another tyre that was better in the snow and ice than the dry and wet. It's not a bad product and it was very good in the snow, but perhaps a bit too good for an all-season tyre, as it was firmly outclassed when not in wintry conditions. The Dunlop Sport All Season is another good tyre, but another tyre that was outclassed by this new breed. Its asymmetric pattern did leave it vulnerable in snow handling, and while it was good in the dry and wet handling test, it did struggle in braking. It did have a low rolling resistance and its wear result was okay. I like the spirit of the tyre, it just needs more on the brakes. The Michelin CrossClimate 2, the tyre that's won every single test I featured it in, dropped down to 4th behind the new trio of tyres. I think the biggest surprise wasn't that it was the best in the snow. I've said this many times that this tyre is too good in the snow for the category. Or it had the lowest rolling resistance on test. It's always performed brilliantly in rolling resistance testing, but the fact it wasn't the best in dry braking, which historically is the Michelin's party piece. I really hope the Michelin can bring wet improvements for the next product, even if that means sacrificing some of its overly impressive snow performance. The CrossClimate 2 is still a great all-season tyre, but now it's over 3 years old, it appears the game is moving on. The Pirelli Cinturato All-Season SF3 would have been the test winner if I hadn't tested wear, and honestly, it was my favourite to drive on. It was the best in the dry, one of the best in the wet, very good around snow handling, and its roll-losing resistance was plenty good enough too. The fact it has high wear might not be an issue for some, plus it's not much higher in cost per 1,000 kilometres than a Michelin, but if wear is important to you, then one of the next two tyres would be a better choice. Certainly it was the most summer feeling of all these all-season tyres, which will be very appealing to some, and it's been a great step on from the SF2 it replaces. I really like how Bridgestone have balanced the new Turanza All-Season 6. They've clearly focused on improving the tread life of the tyre, which historically has been a weak point, while retaining the excellent dry and wet performance. The snow performance wasn't great compared to the best, but it's going to be way better than the summer tyre. So if you're in a region that rarely gets snow, this is a really great option. The only thing it seems to have given up for the extra wear is rolling resistance, as that was pretty high compared to the rest of the group, but overall the new Bridgestone is a fabulous product. And finally, the Continental AllSeasonContact 2 was the tyre that just did everything well. The only negative point I can really mention that it wasn't the best in curved aquaplaning, and ideally I'd like to see it better in dry braking. But in all the other tests it was just great. And it had the lowest wear, which made it the best value per 1,000 kilometres. And it had a low rolling resistance. And it was excellent in the snow. And it was one of the best in the wet. You get the idea. It's an outstanding product from Continental and a tyre which balances its performance across all the categories that just none of the other tyres could match. Huge kudos to Continental, Bridgestone and Pirelli for making 3 new excellent all-season products and moving the category forward. I'm really impressed with these trios. Let me know which one you like the look of below. Any questions, please ask below. And as always, safe motoring.